So today is one of those times where the variance, if you may want to put it that way, between the ordinary rite of the Mass and the extraordinary rite of the Mass becomes a little bit more pronounced than usual. Considering the fact that today in the extraordinary rite, in the calendar of the liturgical celebration, today being the last Sunday of October, we celebrate actually the solemnity of Christ the King. While in the extraordinary rite, it won't be until 2 weeks or 3 weeks away from today. The feast actually the feast began with a proclamation made in 1925 on December 11 to be exact, at the conclusion of the Jubilee year of that year, when then the Pope Pius XI announced to the world that it was about time that, based on the request coming from all parts of the world, a special solemnity be made in honor of the kingship of Christ. And the chosen date was, of course, the last Sunday of October, because then in the order of celebrations, this was the Sunday that preceded the Feast of All Saints. So before we could honor the saints, we must first honor Christ, who is Lord of all, Lord of heaven as well as Lord of the earth. In the extraordinary rite, that is the standard form of the Mass these days, the feast is moved to the final Sunday just before the first Sunday of Advent. The reason being it tries to imitate the cycle of time where at the end of all time, Christ's reign will be complete. Christ will be all in all. But basically, the theme is one and the same, one of celebrating Christ's kingship in the world as we celebrate His kingship and sovereignty over all of us here gathered. The reason forwarded by Pius XI in his encyclical Was Primas that inaugurated the feast, he said, Christ is King because that has always been the tradition of faith. At His birth, men from the East reverence Him as sovereign. At the time of His death, He was enthroned on the cross. So both the East, as represented by the Magi, and the West, as represented by those who persecuted Him, proclaim Him in their own ways as King over all. And it is notwithstanding the fact that He is Son of God as He is Son of Man. And therefore, His kingship is almost a given thing. But His kingship, however, is first and foremost spiritual. Spiritual in the sense that His greatest enemy is not any particular culture, any particular army, any particular earthly kingdom, but one only, and that of Satan and the kingdom of evil. Or as St. John Paul II would describe it, that which represents for us the culture of death. However, it is almost unthinkable for us to limit Christ's kingship only to the spiritual realm, the conquering of evil, because all things have their being, move, and have their being in Him. And therefore, it comes without saying much that He is also King over us all, insofar as we remain His creatures in this world. Perhaps the best way for us to reflect this afternoon on the meaning of His kingship, based on the intentions of Pope Pius XI, is to consider a recently published book in March of this year, written by an American conservative who goes by the name Rob Dreher. Rob Dreher published a most interesting book that, at the time of our speaking, has sold more than 1 million copies already, a few months only from its initial release. The title of the book is The Benedict Option. It has a subtitle which reads, Strategies for Christians in a Post-Christian World. The premise given by Bob Dreher takes its inspiration from another book written by Alistair MacIntyre, After Virtue. He said, there are signs in our times now that to think that it is still possible to reclaim the world for Christianity, or that we may be able to change by ways of political policies, the way things are going, the way things are becoming more secular and secular each day, that cannot be done anymore. It cannot be undone. The deluge has come and the signs are here. From McIntyre's book, he said, for instance, when we make decisions over important things, especially bordering on values and ethical choices, we no longer base these choices on objective and rational grounds, but we argue from what we think we feel like doing or pursuing. And it is given a name, emotivism. We gauge things, we judge things by way of our emotional reaction to these things. Another instance forwarded by the author is the fact that although there are still Christian churches that abound, both Catholic, Protestant, Evangelical, Orthodox, and whatever Christian denomination there may be, chances are that most of these churches, according to the author, are pseudo-Christian churches. They look like, but they're actually not, because they do not have in them the kind of Christianity that we get to read from the scriptures. Instead, in its place, we have a mock version of Christianity, which he calls moral therapeutic deism, or MTD. How does MTD translate? Well, people who belong to this category, Christians who belong to this category, believe that God exists, He created the world, He's basically a good God. He will allow us entrance into heaven if we live a good life. He wants people to be kind and helpful to each other, and that He is the one who answers our prayer when we are in need of something, but other than that, He really doesn't have any significant role to play in our lives. What does that mean? Meaning, according to the author, we use religion to augment, to increase our secular outlooks as Christians, meaning we use religion so that we can actually pursue our sense of happiness, our particular goals and ambitions in life, that we use God to prosper ourselves. And therefore, we are very much self-centered, and we are not the kind of Christian that the Gospels or the Scripture speaks of as willing to sacrifice, to lay down their life, like a seed, willing to die so that it may bear fruit. There's no room for sacrifice, there's no room for real self-giving, and so on and so forth. It's still just me, and me, even in my prayers before God. And so if we think that the author is correct in this analysis, then we can be very well ourselves guilty of the symptoms in our Christian life. And so to address this coming of a new dark ages that is hovering above us, the author proposes the Benedict option. In the Benedict option, he uses as model Saint Benedict of Nursia, the founder of the Benedictine order. Saint Benedict was born at a time when Rome was already a fallen empire. There's not much left of the once glorious empire that was Rome. The Vandals or the barbarians have already sunk it, and what is left is a semblance of its former glory. Not only was Rome dilapidated in a physical sense, there was also total absence of moral values. It was at its lowest level in terms of morality. And this was the Rome that the young teenager Benedict experienced when he was sent to Rome to pursue his studies. He hated it the moment he stepped into it, coming from a provincial part of Italy, and immediately fled and ran to what was then a desolate place to become a hermit, to live alone for God. And in effect, in this living alone for God, he was able to discern a guideline for living, which has been handed down to us over the centuries in the form of the famous rule of Saint Benedict. The guidelines for his monastic communities, but it is very much a guideline intended for all believing Christians who wish to continue to live as Christians in a world that is no longer Christian. And so in this rule for Saint Benedict, he actually outlines certain aspects We are not into going into all the details this afternoon for our reflection, but for instance, it says, based on a common observance recently made by a famous theorist in media studies, McLuhan said, most of the people I know who lost their faith over time are the same people who hardly pray at all. So if we pray like 5 minutes a day, or less than 5 minutes a day, for instance, what kind of Christian life can we expect of ourselves, out of ourselves? Because prayer basically is a pillar in Christian life. There are many other signs that Benedict wanted to plant firmly as pillars of this new community, but for our purposes and understanding, the thing is that for Christianity to survive in a post-Christian world, we have to have our marked identities. We must refuse to be watered down. We must refuse to act normal in some ways. So I suppose in our little ways, our allegiance to the tradition of piety in the church, for instance, would be a good defining mark that separates us from the others. Not because we want to feel special, not because we feel holier than others, but simply because we want to maintain our sense of Christian identity in an overly secular or non-Christian world. Coming, for instance, to the traditional Mass does not mean to say that we prefer this Mass over the extraordinary Mass, but it gives us somehow a chance to continue to immerse ourselves in the long tradition of the Church, especially in her celebration of the liturgy that allows us to pray the way the saints before us have prayed. So our own efforts, whether it's in praying, whether in its more radical form of acknowledging that there is an order that we must follow, where God is at the top of it all, as opposed to the order that is in the world where men rule and God is simply placed under the kingship of men. This allegiance that marks us as different from our other brothers and sisters in the world very much gives hope for the survival of Christianity in our times. Well, we do not have all the time in the world to discuss these options, but again, as it is the practice in our homily, we always refer to the readings from the extraordinary rite, so that we will be able to unite ourselves with those who are participating at Mass in the extraordinary rite, and therefore dispel the idea that we don't like the extraordinary rite. The readings for the extraordinary rite is intended for the 30th Sunday in ordinary time, and today's reading allows Jesus to answer the question, what is the greatest commandments? As opposed to our readings today where Jesus is asked if he is truly a king before Pilate. And to this, Jesus gives us the rule, which is very much like what the rule of Benedict is to strengthen the identity of Christians. That other than our prayers, other than our sense of tradition, we also have to be very pronounced in the area of loving. If we are not as charitable to others, if our charity for others does not exceed the fervor of our piety, the fervor of our holding on to our tradition, then we are not really Christians still. Because Jesus has made the mandate of love as the penultimate rule for conduct and for living, and the only goal that is worth pursuing in life. Very quickly, the saints of old, in their commentaries on these readings from the Gospel of St. Matthew, points out two things. When we are told to love, it means, first of all, love God with all our heart, with all our mind, and with all our soul. Very quickly, the saints explain this. To love God with our heart means that we should not have strong sensual attachments to anything apart from God. When there are many things that attract us, that call for our affection in this life, yet they must not overrule our greater attraction to God. So between watching TV and finding time for prayer, the obvious is given, prayer before television. Loving God with our soul means also to accept internally that there is no greater good other than God. If we think that this house, if I have it, is much better than if I grow spiritually, then we are not loving God with our soul. And the third one is loving God with our mind, other than using knowledge for the pursuit and service of God and His kingdom. We are called by the saints to hold on to the memory of God's goodness in our lives and to never forget that in good times and in bad. In so doing, we have fulfilled the mandate to love God. And loving others is self-explanatory according to the saints, which is the second part of the greatest commandments. Why? Because although we know from experience it's quite difficult to love persons because persons are a strange love, as we are ourselves. Yet they bear in themselves the image and marks of God. So much so, even in their most tarnished form, in the most obnoxious person, the mark of God may be tarnished, but it still is there, and that must be loved equally still, because it is something of God. And therefore the mandate to love others who are unlovable, humanly speaking, remains because God is there in them, as He is in us all. These things, the adherence to strong points of identification, promotes a solid Christian community that is our only way to survive vis-a-vis the world that cannot be brought back to the tradition that is Christianity.